The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
I don't know if you felt this way, Vince, but sometimes in my life, I felt like I'm this far away from doing some really bad things and or having gotten away lucky from something that could have been, chalked up to a crime or these things. And just to think that nobody is their worst act. Nobody that commits a crime is a criminal. Nobody that crosses the border illegally is illegal. And just sort of pulling away from generalizing people into just one act, because a life is 70, 80 years and it's 1,000 acts. And so sort of pulling that away and sort of humanizing just human beings in general, because this is a big policy debate. And we're talking about policies and the ways they're enforced by the Border Patrol agents. But a Border Patrol agent is a man or a woman, and an immigrant is a man or a woman, and they're confronting themselves along the border with policies, but they're still human beings.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. I'm your host, Vincent Rocco Vargas. On today's episode, we talk to JJ Mulligan Sepulveda, who is an immigration lawyer. I wasn't sure what to expect with this conversation because I did read his book, and his book is titled No Person or No Human is Illegal. And just the title alone, I believe, could be controversial to most. What I found in this conversation, I learned a lot from, but a few points that I wanted to mention. He talked about how, yes, someone crossing illegally is breaking a law, but that was a law that they were willing to break due to the fact that the hardships and the difficulties that they had in their own countries, in their minds, it was justifiable. And what he also mentioned, most of his clients, these migrants who crossed illegally, who are now fighting for opportunities to stay in America, are the most patriotic individuals he's ever met. I found this conversation to be enlightening. I think in the end, we both found a place where we could agree on, but as well as I think I opened him up to the side of the discussion that I'm more of an expert at, and that maybe he hadn't really taken the time to see our side or a Border Patrol agent's perspective because he's deep into his work that he's passionate about in helping others trying to stay in this country that they've risked everything for. I just found this conversation to be enlightening, impactful, and I hope you guys do too. I'm in this path of enlightening myself on every viewpoint I can from the Latino experience in America to include a lot of the border crisis. In that same conversation, I was fortunate enough to come across your book, and I audiobook a lot of my books. And so I'd audiobook your book at night at times. And, I did the job as a Border Patrol agent and as interesting as that job is, there were some empathetic views towards, anyone coming across into America wanting to seek the opportunities of America. At the same time, my grandmother came here illegally. She actually stole the identity of her sister to become a United States citizen when her sister passed away at an early age. And so knowing my history, doing the job.
Did you know that before you wrote your book? Is that in your book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I knew this before becoming a Border Patrol agent. And so when my first apprehension in the book, I mentioned there was a woman and a child and her husband, and it was an interesting moment for me to be like, wow, this is what I do. This is what we're doing here, right? And completely understanding the laws and completely understanding the job itself in the career field, it still left me feeling like a little like, that one stings a little. It's a really weird position to be in. I was able to justify why I did the job, but you can read more about that in the book. But, I don't think some people kind of have the position I have and say, man, that was a weird feeling. And I'm not sure how I completely feel with it. And I think my whole career, I kind of struggle with it a little bit. I believe in protecting the country, but I also understand how people want to come to this country and seek the opportunities of it. And so this is kind of why I've dug deeper into this subject. I read multiple different books that were fascinating. I haven't completely finished yours, but I continue to it's one of my night reads that I jump into. But when I started this podcast, when me and the Ironclad team decided to do this, you were one of the first people I said, I want him on. I want to interview him because your opinions and your viewpoints in this are very different from a lot of people that I've worked around. And in trying to move the needle forward in progression in America and trying to bridge this gap of division that we have for this topic, I think the only way we can move forward is by educating people and hearing everyone's opinions. And what we don't have enough of is the discourse like this, is people in your position who've seen it from your eyes, from your perspectives, being able to have a voice and a platform to explain your position, right? And not so explain your position, but just to give insight into what you have witnessed. And if we do this more often, I think we'll actually bridge this gap that we have, this big division in this topic. And I think down the road, we'd probably find that we're all more in the middle of this idea, but it's been turned into a political argument, which is unfair for those of us who work the front lines of it, really trying to, one, protect America, but two, maintain this American ideologies of being this land where people come to for opportunity. And so for me, I thought the best conversations we can have is with some of our most intelligent people in the front lines of this. And your background is one of those.
Well, I don't think I'm one of the most intelligent. You got the wrong guy there. But something that you said that really struck me was your first apprehension. And I'd listened to one of your other interviews and you know more about the Border Patrol than I do, but you said something like 70 or 80% of the folks you worked with were also Latino.
Yeah.
And that's a huge stat that I'd never heard. And the fact that so many folks whose families lived through this are also now sort of enforcing these laws from the broken system is something that's traumatic. I'm sure that was you worked through and you justified the job, as you said, but it's traumatic too. And it's also really heavy thing to have to do when you're thinking about your grandmother, for example, or other people like that. And so I think what you're saying about sort of opening the conversation, it starts with that too, because it's a lot of this us versus them, right? I'm an immigrant rights advocate, so I have to be against the Border Patrol agents. But a lot of times that's the best job, that federal government salary, the benefits, the Latino community, that's also good for them in some ways. And the
Correct.
ways that folk are forced to choose sort of these, bad or good is really harmful in a lot of ways.
Right. I didn't expect to jump off to this point so fast, and we'll backtrack a little later. But, I believe there's a position where you don't have to dislike the Border Patrol themselves. I think the argument goes more for what policies that are put in place by even the higher up, the higher echelon, right? Because Border Patrol is nothing more than a vessel that implements the policy. The Border Patrol themselves don't create the policy. And so just like a highway patrol doesn't create the speed limit, he just enforces it. There is parts of the Border Patrol career field that I believe most activists would appreciate. We rescue more people on those borders than any other agency, and we stop more drugs than any other agency across the nation. So those are things that I think everyone could agree on. Stopping drugs is a good thing, right? And everyone will agree to that one. But the part of, like in your book where you say no human is illegal, well, that's a position that you take, and I would love to dig deeper into that idea and why you titled your book that.
Right now. Okay.
Let's do it.
In the immigration law statute, if you read deeply into it, it's always a legal alien is what anyone who's not a U.S. citizen will be titled in Immigration and Nationality Act. And first off, I also work a lot with criminal defense, like public defenders. Whenever there's a non-citizen who picks up a crime, I'm always someone that they call to advise on what are a safer plea or those kind of things. And I don't know if you felt this way, Vince, but sometimes in my life, I felt like I'm this far away from doing some really bad things and or having gotten away lucky from something that could have been, chalked up to a crime or these things. And And just to think that nobody is their worst act. Nobody that commits a crime is a criminal. Nobody that crosses the border illegally is illegal. And just sort of pulling away from generalizing people into just one act, because a life is 70, 80 years and it's 1,000 acts. And so sort of pulling that away and sort of humanizing just human beings in general, because this is a big policy debate. And we're talking about policies and the ways they're enforced by the Border Patrol agents. But a Border Patrol agent is a man or a woman, and an immigrant is a man or a woman, and they're confronting themselves along the border with policies, but they're still human beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For the audience who probably didn't know, and sometimes I just like to jump into the conversation because I just want to get into it. But if you don't mind, explain your background. You graduated from law school at UC Davis, and you've been studying immigration law for many years now. And if you don't mind, you can give us kind of a general background of who you are and your background, your experience.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer. And like you said, I graduated from UC Davis School of Law. I worked a couple years in New York City through a fellowship called the Immigrant Justice Corps. And because the immigration laws are like so broad, so big, and there's so many people in immigration proceedings now, there's just not enough attorneys to represent immigrants. And so this project was basically trying to get as many people representation as you can, because if you commit a crime in the U.S., the Constitution affords you an attorney at no charge to yourself. Whatever, that's a public defender. But if you enter the U.S. Surreptitiously and you are in deportation proceedings, even if that means going back to some war-torn country or a country where there's gang violence that has just engulfed the country, you don't get an attorney unless you can afford one, unless you can find one at a nonprofit like I've always worked at. The Immigration Nationality Act specifically says that you get an attorney at no cost to the federal government. And the Supreme Court has said deportation is not a punishment, as opposed to potentially going to jail. And so the project in the Immigrant Justice Corps was to provide as many attorneys as they could to represent immigrants in deportation proceedings. So I did that for a couple of years. And then through a wonderful Fulbright grant, I went to sort of see in southern Spain what the situation was like, and work at the university in Granada. The folks were crossing the Mediterranean into southern Spain, and sort of see a comparative approach to what was happening along the U.S. border along with the Mediterranean ocean border. And then I got a job back at UC Davis School of Law at the wonderful Immigration Law Clinic, where I still work. It was like the life-changing experience for me in law school was working for Holly Cooper and Amagda Perez, who are the co-directors. They really changed my career path. And so to be able to come back and work with them and work with law students has been a wonderful, wonderful experience. We work with individuals that can't afford attorneys, and with law students representing those individuals in their deportation proceedings. Like I said, we work also with public defenders. We've done a couple bigger lawsuits against the federal government for detention policies against unaccompanied minors, so kids that are under 18 that arrived in the U.S. When they're in detention centers. We've done a couple different lawsuits to sort of better their conditions of confinement as well.
That's great. My daughter actually just got accepted to law school. And so we're excited to see. Yeah. She's kind of the,
Which law school, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, she's still trying to make a decision. She got accepted to Ohio State, where she's graduating in a couple months. And then she applied for a few in the DC East Coast area. And so she's kind of sitting there trying to make a decision. Several of those has given her almost full rides. And so we're excited to see what she does. I'm excited to see yeah. I don't know.
Give her my number after this if you want. I'll talk to her about where to go in law school and the whole process. I'm sure she has a ton of people to speak with, but if she wants, I'm happy to speak with her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will. So, we're all driven by a reason, and you say that you were inspired to become an immigration lawyer because of your mother. Would you mind telling us a little bit backstory on your mother? And she's from Chile, correct?
Yeah. So my mother is Chilean. She's from Chile. She was actually originally born in Argentina, but she left for Chile when she was 5. So she's always considered herself more Chilean. But when my mom was 23, the Pinochet regime issued a coup d'etat and killed Salvador Allende, the president in Chile, and took over the power in Chile. And so my mother, who was leftist and voted for Allende and was always supporting him, was in her last semester of college. They shut the university down. And so she had actually married a U.S. citizen who was in the Peace Corps about 2 years before that. And so that was her ability to enter the U.S. And of course, back then, she had no idea that the U.S. CIA was the ones that had helped engineer the coup. And so she unfortunately left Chile for the U.S., which had caused her to leave the U.S., ironically. And so because she had married a U.S. citizen, she didn't have the problems or the difficulties maybe that your grandmother had in her entrance to the U.S. But just the experience of seeing an immigrant in the U.S. and the different reactions to it. I grew up in Nevada, which is a good place in a lot of ways, and also a very prejudicial place in some ways. She had some difficult challenges there. She overcame so many. She got her PhD. She was a professor at the university there. Just an incredibly inspirational person in my life. And just to see all the things that she had done and was able to accomplish. And she was always an immigrant rights activist. And so that was sort of my inspiration to get into this field.
I love that. You mentioned about the coup and the CIA and kind of America causing a little bit of the reason for it almost. And those are things that on this show, we're going to dig deeper into. We actually have a few other people who will be talking about those because you're not doing a service to this if you're leaving out part of the history and the facts of it. You know what I mean? And so the fact that you mentioned that, we will be mentioning that in further interviews down the road. So thank you for even saying that.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier sort of the pull to come to the U.S., like the legacy of the U.S. and the U.S. attracting a lot of these people. But there's a lot of push factors too that cause people to leave their countries, and a lot of that is tied to U.S. foreign policy, U.S. intervention, the interests of capitalism.
Yeah, that's fact. We were deporting. I just talked to a gentleman yesterday, an investigative journalist whose name was Alex. He mentioned how we were deporting a lot of the gang members that were here illegally and sending back to El Salvador, which ended up turning around and creating this havoc in El Salvador, which turned the streets dangerous. And so it was inadvertently we were trying to do the right thing at that point to deport them, but it turned around and it almost destroyed that country. And now the country's back on its feet. And they have a new president who's doing his own version of trying to fix that, but that comes with its own controversy as well. And so it seems like there's always something. There's a pro and a con to everything. It's a cause and effect for every kind of action, and it's where we find ourselves today. Why this conversation is so relevant. I want to dig deeper into your views on immigration, and we are a country, a sovereign nation. We have laws. Currently those laws state if you enter into this country outside of a port of entry, you are breaking a law. Okay. And so at a time when I was serving as a Border Patrol agent, there was a repercussion for that. There was jail time. There was 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever that may be. But that created its own deterrence, right? The trafficking organizations identified that their people weren't getting through. And when they were getting through, they were getting captured and they were getting put to jail. So the shift in the traffic happened at that time. But it actually kind of deemed itself a more safer border at the time. It was a policy that was put into place by the Obama administration. And Obama administration at the time was very strict on immigration. And then you fast forward to the Trump administration, he implements other things. And I know you were a big advocate for fighting against a part of the Trump administration when he was the the travel ban. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there is a law here, right? And when people break that law, they're held accountable in the country. And you as a lawyer, you're fighting for those individuals. Now, I do understand the side of asylum cases, and even those asylum cases who enter the country illegally still get seen as an asylum case. But, when when trying to understand this from your perspective, how do you see that? Do you think that our laws are wrong or incorrect, or do you feel that we should have an open border per se and allow anyone to enter this country, or is it just a misconception of the wording of the title of the book? And as I got into your book, it kind of felt more that that the country is wrong by even having some of these laws.
Well, first off, I don't think the U.S. If you look through the history of the U.S., the laws that have been on the books throughout the years have not always been right and have not always been just. We had slavery. We had people that were, considered 3/5 of a person. Up until the 1960s, you couldn't marry someone that was of a different race in the South. Until the Loving case from the Supreme Court. I mean, there was all kinds of laws that have been unjust throughout history in the United States. So I've never been of the view that just because there is a law in place that it must be automatically the best thing for everyone involved. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where there can just be free flow of movement like the European Union. But it is interesting to compare something like the European Union with the very militarized border of the United States and see what works and what doesn't. I'm not saying that the European Union is better in that, or that the U.S. should completely just let whoever wants to come in. I think we've been doing deterrence for 30 years in various ways. And this as a Border Patrol agent, but they've built various stretches of walls throughout the last 30 years as a form of deterrence. So the folks that are trying to cross the border or go to a point of entry, those points of entries can be very far apart, can be very difficult to get to unless you're talking to El Paso. Some of the places that folks have to get to walking are flat out dangerous, right? And so the Border Patrol fences have funneled people into the most dangerous areas in the desert. I don't think that that's the best way to do things. I don't think that big shifts in policies have happened, really. You mentioned the Obama administration enforcing the laws really heavily. I don't think there's a huge difference now, unfortunately, from what Trump was doing to what Biden's doing. I think those administrations have done very similar things in immigration.
The current,
but
the
more
current
broadly
policy,
speaking, yeah,
right. And just to chime in real quick, the current policy that is in place by the Biden administration is massively different in the sense of what happens after apprehension. That's just
in some ways. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's any one policy, right? Because we're talking about, for example, Title 42 was one policy that crossed over to both administrations, or there was family separation that has been done in various ways, more forcefully under the Trump administration, but is still happening under the Obama administration, where young people are forced to cross unaccompanied because there's no way for their parents to come. And so there's dozens of different policies. It's difficult to call immigration policy any one thing right now. There's so many things at play and changing every single day. And that's why most immigration lawyers, we have like Google alerts for everything that is going down, because every little minuscule thing is changing in a little bit every day. None of the big laws are changing. They haven't changed in 30 years.
Yeah, right. Title 8 is Title 8. It's been Title 8 and for many years.
Right.
And
yeah.
It's
they haven't been able to agree on anything. They've tried again this week, right? And they completely failed on all of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a crazy time. When we talk about immigration law, what happens on our borders in America, we also have to mention Homeland Security. After 9/11, the implementation of Homeland Security. So because, us as America, we have enemies, right? We have people who just don't like what we do, our way of life. There's extreme ideologies, there's other countries, so on and so forth. And so what happens daily on our borders, and not just our borders, but in America, is we have to be favorable to both of those arguments. And what a lot of people don't realize is that we are allowing legal immigration, right? Last year, we allowed 1.5 million people to use the legal route coming into America the legal way. But it also takes sometimes 5, 10, 15 years for some of these individuals and costs an exorbitant amount of money. And so not everyone has the opportunity to do that. And I know that. And I understand, like, if we were going to fix something just in that side of things, there has to be a more streamlined approach to that. But the fear is what's happening currently on our border is just the massive influx of numbers is how many people that want to do harm to this country are slipping through the cracks. And that is, I guess, if I'm trying to find a balanced argument about the border, I have to try and find the balanced argument for both. And I can't just only favor immigration. Now you're an immigration lawyer, so that is your space, right? So that is your focus. But me as a former special operations guy in the military, me as a guy who really cares about this great nation and worked on the boots on ground, I kind of see both of those perspectives. And in your line of work, do you guys ever have a concern of the Homeland Security type of the argument? And I know not so much in your work per se, but personally in your own life, do you have a concern of those outliers who come to this country who potentially want to do harm to us?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never have that in my own work where I've had a client who's ever been, like a mass shooter or a terrorist or drug dealer or anything like that. But it is concerning, more so as a father than an immigration lawyer, what could potentially happen to my kids. But it doesn't occur to me as much to think that that threat is going to come from outside as much as it could come from inside the U.S. And, we might have different points of view, and I hate to get way off topic on this, but
no, you're good.
The gun issue in the U.S. is something that scares me a lot for my kids that, are in elementary school and do active shooter drills and those kind of things. And that's something if we're talking about the states of fear that I go through, that's something as a father that I go through a lot. Now,
absolutely.
The Department of Homeland Security, they have a huge job. The amount of people that enter the U.S. as tourists alone, not even talking about folks trying to cross surreptitiously across the border, is huge, right? The folks that 9/11 didn't happen because those folks had crossed over seeking asylum. They were on tourist visas to fly to the U.S. to visit New York as a tourist visit too, and so that plays into it as well. But the bigger question is, I think your perspective is stronger on mine on that because you've been along the border. You've seen a lot more heavy shit than I've seen and boots on the ground than I've seen. I sit in an office and shuffle papers. So I think your view on that is more poignant than mine.
No, I hear you. And, the gun conversation, as someone who's trained with guns his whole life, who has no fear about guns in my household in the sense and carries when I feel the need to carry, the active shooter conversation is scary for all parents. Right. That's one of those.
Sure.
It's one of those situations that I think we can't get away from as Americans because it's just turned prevalent, and these gun arguments left and right. Again, it's one of those things I think people need to have more discussions about it because we'll never get to a place of comfort on it. I think about it all day, and I hate to think that I have to warn my kids and kind of mentally prepare them for a possible scenario. But it's just where we're at right now. And unfortunately, I don't want my kids to know my life, right? I don't want my kids to know my fears. I don't want them to carry my I guess the emotional pressure I have already in my head with knowing the world of what it is. Being overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, it wasn't uncommon for us to do the intelligence on an individual that was a known terrorist to have contacts in America. And so that's where me coming into being a border patrol agent was important because I thought about the Homeland Security side of things, of the argument, more than I ever did immigration until I got there.
Sure. Then
I was like, oh shit, there's a whole different side of it I didn't understand.
But for example, when you're talking about that, your intelligence at some point you've gotten wrong, right? Like a contact in the U.S., that contact was just a friend or a family member, something like that. He wasn't helping to plan anything. That's happened before, right? And so
correct. There's times where it was just a contact based on family and it wasn't a threat. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and along the border, I feel like this is a conversation that I've had with a friend who's a police officer as well. I mean, you can't automatically assume because you're in a certain neighborhood or because you see someone that's dressed a certain way or has a certain skin color that they're going to be a problem for your work as a police officer. And I'm sure along the border as a border patrol agent, if you have some squat, scrawny 14-year-old kid, you're not as worried about that as you are other types of individuals that you encounter along the border, right?
Yeah, but an experienced law enforcement officer will tell you there's a such thing that is called articulable facts, and it's based on a wealth of experience that can lead. And in a sense, right, it is profiling based on the experience of the officer. But at times, it could be very beneficial to protecting your own safety. And so this is really weird space as a law enforcement officer where you see patterns and you understand demographics sometimes or locations. I knew there were certain areas on the border that were always going to be good for dope loads. And so when vehicles coming out of there, you're like, this is one of those areas that we know smuggles dope. I have to check. And you might be wrong at times, but then there's a good portion of the time it's right because it's a known travel location. So you tend to fall into the trap of profiling, and it's just kind of the deal, and unfortunate, but also fortunate. This is how these jobs are done well with experience, but as well as knowing that I don't want to be someone who does profile. I think should be on every law enforcement officer's mind is like, but with experience and knowing my areas, the lay of the land, and kind of the op tempo, you can be really successful at your job by identifying these patterns. And so it's this really odd space. Lawyers probably don't want to hear that too much, right? Because then that looks like
I mean, I understand that there's also a personal safety issue and doing your job in the correct way and having that wealth of experience as well. But when that profiling goes and invades sort of society at large is when it's the bigger issue, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's happening a lot in this immigration debate that we're talking about. It's the larger profiling that maybe occurs to certain individuals, like during the Trump administration, his campaign was calling, they're all drug dealers, they're all rapists, they're all those things. And that sort of profiling sort of invaded this debate in a certain way. And this response on the other side has been, no, no one's a saint, right? And so there's, like you said earlier, the truth is somewhere in between of that, right?
Yeah, I didn't like that either. Sometimes some of those talking points that Trump used created a lot of tension and a lot of division. And it was, he would spout these things.
Were you on the Border Patrol during the Trump administration?
No, I was an actor. I was an actor in Hollywood. I was living the dream. I was spoiled. Okay. I walked away in 2015 during the Obama administration. I believe it was still, yeah. And so, I got out before that, but I'm still, a patriot of the country. And I saw just the chaos that it happened from the division of the country during the Trump administration. I don't want my country to be divided. I don't want that. I want to find, almost a homeostasis of some sort, and so when you make a comment like that and it gets used as a soundbite and then it gets turned into almost its own weapon, that's unfortunate because we created more division by using it. I have a background in psychological operations. I have finishing up my master's degree in psychology. I understand messaging.
My wife's a clinical psychologist. It's fascinating.
Yeah, awesome.
There you go.
So understanding how our media is created a lot more division by pulling people more towards one direction and making the subject more emotional. When Trump used that, when he said that, it created an emotional response for people who say, "Whoa, that's racist," or whatever they wanted to call it, and then it turned into a tool. It turned into a weapon, and that's why we have so many people that are not even willing to sit here and have this discussion. Me and you might not be on the same spectrum of ideologies when it comes to this, but at the same time, we can have a discussion and you can have your opinion, I can have mine. And, I don't have to yell at you about it, but people choose to do that on social media, which is unfortunate because we don't, like I said, move the needle in a positive direction. When it comes to immigration, I tell people, this is a complex subject and, not everyone's going to see it the same. I personally believe someone who breaks a law, okay, well, there should be a repercussion. And if that law is if people don't like that law, well, then we need to find a way to vote it out. It's kind of like, democratic process, right? But, I do feel for people coming to this country seeking asylum, and so, in your career, there's cases that you have to manage that I would love to hear some that are just so unfair because of their situation and you have to fight really hard for them. I would love to hear some of those cases. So us as maybe people who are so removed from that part of it can have hopefully a better insight into what that looks like on your end. Some of the unfortunate things that our laws maybe don't help or hurt families. If you can talk on some cases, I know there's an oath to that as well.
Well, yeah, I don't know about any specific cases that come to mind. There's a lot that just has seemed so unfair over the years, but it doesn't do much to sort of wallow in that unfairness. And to be honest, all of my clients, no one has ever said this is so unfair that this happened to me. There's uniformly a strength and a courage within these individuals it just blows. It's inspiring to me. It's what keeps me going. Really, is their ability to just say, when I'm banging my head against the wall saying this is so unfair, they're like, no, we'll find a way. We'll keep fighting, kind of thing. But some of the things that come to mind, for example, are there's a visa called a U visa. It's for victims of crimes.
Yes.
If it has to be a crime that was committed in the U.S. So you as a Border Patrol agent, you've seen along the border some heavy stuff, right? The young women that have been raped, right? If it's on the Mexican side of the border, even if you catch the individual who did it, that person will not qualify for the U visa. If it's on the U.S. side of the border, they could qualify for a U visa if they help law enforcement and report it. And so just that little issue right there, for example.
Right.
What I mentioned earlier about not having access to counsel. I've been in an immigration law courtroom, an immigration court, where I've seen 8-year-olds sitting with an ICE attorney on one side, the judge in front of them, and a translator next to him, and having no attorney. And that to me, with an 8-year-old daughter, is the epitome of unfair, because I can't imagine her having to face a judge here, go through the notice to appear, go through the whole thing with the ICE attorney right next to them.
Yeah, my 10-year-old couldn't even handle that. My 14-year-old couldn't handle that.
Yeah. So, a lot of people that I know that are in their 20s couldn't handle that.
Yeah, my wife would probably break down. So things like that. Let's focus on that right there. What do we do to change that? So the undocumented, the unaccompanied minors subject on its own is such a heavy one, right? First question is, why do people do it? Then you go, I can't question what they're experiencing in life. So if they're coming here, undocumented, that's because they have a reason to. They're willing to risk their life. They're willing to trek across all these lands. They're willing to risk being sexually assaulted, raped, and trafficked just to come to America, right? To chase this dream of opportunity. But then they get left there to see a judge at 8 years old by themselves. Like, what do we do? How are you supposed to fix that? How are we supposed to fix that as a country?
Well, some of the policies created unaccompanied minors. So you're talking about what made them come to the U.S. Well, they came with their parents, but there was family separation, or there was Title 42, for example. Title 42, there were parents with their kids in Mexico, and that did not apply if you showed up in the U.S. As an unaccompanied minor. So the parents would send their kids at the port of entry by themselves because they were denied at the port of entry during Title 42. And so that created a whole group of unaccompanied minors through U.S. policy, completely irrelevant to what made them leave their country. What made them leave their country not related to U.S. policy? Well, there's a huge problem, as you mentioned earlier, with gang violence in lots of Central American countries. And for me, it seems incredibly brave and courageous that a 16-year-old, when I was 16, I wouldn't have been able to make such a heavy decision, but to leave your country and everything you know, instead of joining a gang and doing some very harmful, heavy things to other people, you make that trek on your own and decide, I'm going to look for a better life because I don't want that life. That for me is a lot of my unaccompanied minor children that have made that decision. And that is a huge decision.
No, I agree. I think it's powerful.
And so what you're talking about earlier about not wanting to break a law, those kids are making that choice not to break those laws in their home country, join gangs, kill people, deal drugs, do this whole thing. But they're coming to the U.S. and maybe they're breaking that law to enter the U.S. at a non-port of entry. But what is that? What is that choice that they have there?
Yeah, you spoke about the conditions in some of the detention centers. Do you want to, if you can, just speak about your opinion on that real quick? And I have not just a counter, but I want to talk about kind of the system itself and what what we have. And I'm just would love to talk about that.
Yeah. So when specifically for unaccompanied minors, you mean, or just detention centers?
For all detention currently. Okay.
So detention center, as you know, for CBP, there's holding cells that folks aren't supposed to be in for more than 4 or 5. You've seen those places that nobody should be there for more than a week in those places. It's not someone a place for folks to live a long time in. But there's also ICE facilities within the U.S. There used to be, and there still are, I think, 1 or 2 ICE family detention centers. And so that's when family units come together. There's ones for mothers and children, ones for fathers and children. You'll see moms with their 5-year-old daughters in these facilities. There's also ORR facilities, the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So when an unaccompanied minor comes to the U.S., they don't go into ICE custody, they go into ORR custody. And those detention centers also have their own levels of custody within them. It goes shelter, staff secure, and RTC. And so it's like this whole level. The secure facilities are jails. And so an unaccompanied minor can be stepped up to different types of facilities based solely on their behavior within a detention center. So it could be, these are highly traumatized kids. It could be they're going through some stuff. It could be just bad behavior, the kind of stuff our kids would do in an elementary school. They're doing, and they're getting stepped up, and they could end up in a jail. And so part of our lawsuit, it was called Lucas R. v. Azar, was a class action, was sort of putting into some protections for those kids when they're stepped up to have due process so that they're not just ending up in jails because they're, talking back to someone.
Yeah, I worked in a prison for a couple of years, and in the prison setting, it was a contracted prison, which you already know the contract prison is already kind of a controversial subject. But then for those
ICE contracts with the local yes. county jails, and yeah.
So part of our prison was an ICE contract, and so we had a lot of, anyone who's been arrested for entering illegal. But then what you witness in the prison setting is that they have to be their own prison gang as well. And so they house up with paisas, which is not necessarily a gang. It's really just kind of a union, if you will, or a protection group. And so they house up together and they protect each other from some of the outside, actual literal prison gangs. And so they have to do that. And by the power of numbers, they've been able to kind of protect themselves and protect each other. But that's pretty wild for someone who's never been to prison, who eventually goes to prison and starts to learn what prison code is based on just having to be housed and waiting for their immigration judge hearing. It's part of the conversation people don't talk about.
I'm interested when you're in that facility, how did you, because you talked about when people break the law, they have to have consequences, but how did you compare sort of those individuals, for example, that were detained by ICE and put in that facility with the folks that had committed burglary or assault? Or
so there was no separate. There was no separation of contract in the sense of what they wore, but there is different parts of the prison where different contracts did wear a different top. So when I was in the detention side, they were all waiting hearings, and so they were all wearing detention uniform. Everyone's wearing the orange, right? Your normal orange or red or green, whatever that was. And so there was no difference between them and someone who was in there for waiting for drug smuggling or attempted murder or whatnot. So they were in there with everyone else and just awaiting their hearing. That was a detention portion.
And how did you feel with those individuals? Like, what was your interaction with them? Was there a difference? Could you tell? Imagine they've been wearing the same thing.
Yeah, no, what's funny is that I was so ignorant to all of this subject at that time. I just got out of the military. I was, just got back from Afghanistan. So I was trying to get onto the SORT team and do the whole, if there's a riot, I want to be able to protect, that kind of thing. And so I started to learn while I was there and try to understand, man, none of these dudes speak English. That's crazy. Why? Those are Mexican nationals. They're paisas. Why are they paisas? Well, they came over illegally, and so they're waiting their hearing. And parts of it was starting to understand it. And as I was leaving there, the 2 years, I really started to catch grasp of seeing how there was a massive removal, massive all right, we're releasing 120 of these guys. They're getting deported back to wherever they come from. And you start to hear the conversation. And so that's when I started to understand it and actually kind of ask more questions. I didn't really put it all together until I became a Border Patrol agent. And then when you'd apprehend people and then you realize they're going back to the same detention center, I'm like, oh shit, these dudes are getting housed.
Fascinating. You've been at every level of
I've seen all of this.
Potential immigrant, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen because after I was a regular agent, I went and became a medic, and I was part of the search, trauma, and rescue unit. So I spent a lot of my BORSTAR. I was the medic. I was there. Okay. I was their medic. Eventually, I became attached to BORTAC because of my military experience and continued to do. And so that mission in itself is starkly different than a Border Patrol agent, right? We're not looking for people crossing illegally per se. As a BORSTAR agent, I was looking for people who were lost because they scattered from the group in my attempts to save lives, to find lost migrants and try and save their life. And then later I became part of the team as we would do any kind of warrants or really drug trafficking organizations disruption. So a very different job halfway through my career that I felt more settled in and more kind of felt prepared to do. And so I got to see the full spectrum of what the Border Patrol can do outside of just regular Border Patrol agent work. But I also, like I said, the 2 years in the prison, it really opened my eyes to, this is all very interesting and I need to learn more. And so that's kind of why I've jumped into this subject, right? And why I wanted to understand, more of your perspective. The whole idea of no one is illegal is, people use the argument like, well, this country was taken. Yeah, I know, but I don't want to use a time machine to make my argument valid. What I want to do is, how can I fix it from what we have now? And a lot of people would say that some of our laws, just like our immigration laws, would be more racist or feel that, they have racist undertones in why they do what they do. But I just don't know how a country can be established as a country without having a fortified border. And so these are all, it's tough for me. It's tough for me to kind of, and I need someone like you to have your perspective for me to be educated on it, also learn, but as well as to hopefully educate others on your perspectives on this. And, digging deeper into that, I mean, I would love to hear more on how you feel, that how should we handle our borders? How should we allow people to come in and at what point are our resources exhausted? At what point do we have to slow down the influx of migration where we're not overdoing? Look at our sanctuary cities now. They're all struggling because the resources and you see they're housing, migrants into places that used to be for kids for their school because there's no resources. And so all of these things are repercussions of influx, and not to say that the influx of immigration wasn't caused by us or whatever the case, but I see the big picture and it all concerns me. And from your perspective, I would love to hear, how do we maintain what's happening right now? The massive influx of illegal immigration, the overuse or overabundance of resources in every city, sanctuary city, and border towns. How do we maintain this as a country and not kind of lose, what we have?
First off, I think I have a lot more to learn from you than you have to learn from me. So I'm not going to educate you on anything because your experiences in Afghanistan, Iraq, along the border, within jails. I think that's, first off, I think you've lived through some very traumatic spaces, and a lot of what you've seen and what you've done is incredibly brave and difficult. So I think I have a lot more to learn from you than you from me, but I appreciate you asking these questions. I don't have a good answer for that, Vince. I haven't been able to. There is so much work as an immigration lawyer representing individuals and trying to just get basic human dignity for folks in detention that I've never sort of sat down and sketched what I think is a perfect immigration law system. I think we are long overdue for some serious changes. I think that we do have the resources, and I do think we have the space. If you talk with any of the California agricultural big farm owners, they want immigrants. Any of the folks working in the nursing homes. All of our older population in the U.S. is cared for by immigrants. And every time we have a huge crackdown on immigration, nursing homes, agriculture, lots of spaces lose a lot of their best workers. That's not to say that everyone should come in. And that's not to say that it's not valid your concerns about who we let in and what the resources we have in the U.S. But I think there is space for a lot more. And I think that a lot of, we talked about this earlier, but a lot of the push from some of those countries, and you said the time machine, and you're totally right about that, but that annuls a lot of their arguments, because a lot of what these folks are coming to the U.S. is because the U.S. took so much from their countries. And so to have this argument to say that now they're coming here and they're going to take from us is negating a bit of how much. You talk about Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico. 30% of the U.S. was Mexico, first off, and we took that, and so it's impossible to not have a discussion about this logically without considering some of the past, because the U.S. has taken so much from some of these places. In my mother's country, in Chile, the copper industry, a lot of this directly relates to some of the poverty, to some of the issues going on in this country, that people can't go on living the way they were.
No, I hear you. And JJ, you do have a valid position in this. You are an immigration lawyer. You're the front lines. You see this. And so I know there's things I don't see. I know there's things I'm missing. And this is why, like, I want to interview people like you, because I'm not going to go get my immigration law, my law degree in immigration, because I don't have the time for that one. So I'm going to rely on you guys to inform me and to educate me on those subjects. A lot of things that's happened from America and what they've done. I can't say I agree to a lot of it, but sometimes there was purchases that were agreed upon both countries. There's business decisions that are made and agreed upon both countries. Not everyone understands repercussions of those aftermath, right? It's kind of the same cause and effect, but like part of the purchase of America from Mexico wasn't agreed on term. And so those are things like, but there was also treaties with all the Mexican nationals that had their land within the U.S. that were never honored. And so all the individuals that were living in California, Texas, they owned all of those places, and they were supposed to keep their land, and they never did. And you're right. There was, yes.
There was business deals, but it was big brother, little brother business deals where you're bullying the little brother. And so I agree with you in that there is some issues that, at some point you're just saying you're crying foul on everything that the U.S. has ever done. No, not everything, but there were some things that were extremely unfair, especially when you have the benefit of hindsight and seeing what occurred because of those things.
Do you feel like America is racist? That's a crazy question. And I don't want to hit you with let me stop. I never want you to say something that look, and I can edit this out. I don't care. But, a lot of people feel there's racism here. And I'll tell you my perspective on it. So then I think you'll understand is I think sometimes when we feel racism, we start to believe there's racism, and then we see the world through racist goggles. I can't say that people haven't been racist towards me and my dark skin, right? I have light-skinned kids, but I'm dark skinned. I know people judge me. I have tattoos that the average person probably doesn't have. I know people probably see me and right away assume that I was a bad guy. And I know that. So I'm very cautious when I, walk into a room and there's probably an old lady by herself. I don't want to intimidate her. And so there's people that make judgments of me. The fact that I don't speak Spanish, my own Latino culture sometimes doesn't even relate to me, right? I'm the enemy to them sometimes. The fact that I talk on this subject from this perspective, I'm considered the pocho, the coconut, the Uncle Juan. I've been called it all. And so when I've read these books from very intelligent people, not just yours, but I'm saying, and yours is not as much as some of these other books, but it always comes with an undertone of like America's racist. And I want to get down to the bottom of that and saying, like, if we use that term too heavily, we start to lose what our Latino culture should gain from being in America is opportunity. And when we see the world through racist lens, my fear is that then we have a victim that is slowing us down. You're Latino, you're a lawyer, right? Like my daughter's Latina, she's hopefully going to be a lawyer. And what I want to see is more of us in our Latino culture, see people like you and say, I want to be more like him. I want to have opportunity. I want to get to positions where I can help, right? Like if you've done, and and I get very fearful when we use the term racist too easily, because it becomes this shadow of a figment of their imagination, slowing their progression, and that's what I fear. And so when I say that, I don't mean to put a gotcha question. More so. I don't even answer that. Let me say this.
No, well, let me say this. That
please,
I can't answer that bigger question. I don't think I can, do an entire sort of autopsy of the American condition. But I will say that through immigration law, which I know fairly well, the case law and the immigration law statute, I do believe is racist. And really? Because it hasn't changed in so many years, it hasn't been updated. We don't have the opportunity to move past what you're talking about.
Understood.
The original law was written in 1952. You can imagine what the country was thinking in those years. It's been updated in 1965, maybe a little better, and it hasn't been really touched extensively since 86. And so the views in the United States in the last 30 years have shifted in so many different ways that if you're still using that as your lens, which to judge immigrants, then you're going to have an issue as well with the racism. And then they're building out off of that to various departments within the Department of Homeland Security, which is enforcing this original law, which I do believe to be racist. And some of the court cases that are still in effect that have not been overruled that come directly from that, I believe are racist as well. And so when you're enforcing that, yes, I do believe that there's some racist issues going on within immigration law. I won't be able to answer your question more fully on what you're talking about.
No, that's great. No, I appreciate that. That's probably the question I should have asked, and I think the answer is perfect. How do us as a country, how come we haven't been able to change that law? How come every president for the past 30, 40 years, you've seen, has said immigration is a topic that they're going to focus on, and all they do is scrape the top layer off of that cake, put a different, frosting on it and say, we're good. How come we haven't dug into those deep layers? How come nobody really wants to do an overhaul on the immigration policy so it is more fair and it doesn't have racial undertones like you say?
I don't know. I don't know why they haven't been able to. I know that the last 10 years, Congress just has not been able to deal with it. And I think it is a fear of losing power from the politicians, that they're either going to be considered too soft or too hard. And so nobody will be able to compromise or negotiate on certain things. And to be honest, with the current state of affairs within the Congress, I don't want them to write the new immigration law. With what's going on. If I had my dream, it would be my mother's country, Chile. They're finally changing the constitution that had been in effect since the Pinochet years. And what they did was fascinating, and it didn't work out really well, unfortunately. But the idea was that they would get constituents from various areas in the community. They had the Mapuche community, they had the workers' unions, they had different people coming together and trying to write what they wanted their country to look like. And if you could do something like that with the immigration law statute, I think you would get something more humane and more reflective of the United States than going through Congress and the president.
Yeah, they tried to do that bipartisan law recently for the border, but inside of that immigration kind of, was the Ukraine issue and everything else, and so that
Israel,
didn't work.
Yeah, it was tied to Israel or Ukraine. There was no way to do it.
If we're gonna focus on the border, let's focus on the border. Yeah. It's all of these things. Just a crazy time. Even though this isn't a Republican Democrat thing, because both sides have not really touched the deep parts of our policies. Obama didn't touch it. It was, like I said, it's surface level and focus on Homeland Security. The Trump administration didn't change anything deep rooted, right? The Biden administration currently is not changing anything deep rooted. I don't understand what it's going to take for us to get down to that level and really rewrite policies so it doesn't feel, I guess, racist, if you will, but have, if it was created in the 50s, you already know it has some kind of racial undertone, whether it was apparent or not, So you see the massive influx of immigration. You see it happening. Is there no concern of that right now for you, from your position? Do you think this is, it's okay, we can handle it, let's bring them all in? Is it that kind of idea? Is that kind of the position you take on this? And
not really. No, I think that if we do smart, targeted investments in those countries to make them livable, and not say the U.S. corporations are just going to, invade whatever they want in those countries and take whatever they want, and they make those countries really livable. So folks have minimum wages, so they're able to have a subsistence living. There's a lot of farmers, individual farmers, still subsistence farming in Central American countries. And if we make life livable for them, there's not the same need to come to the U.S. I don't think, I think the U.S. does need immigrants, and that's proved true throughout Absolutely. The economy in different ways. I think there are individuals that really need to leave their country because of what's happening. And I think the U.S. has always been built on accepting those, even from World War II on. I mean, let's not forget in the beginning of World War II, when we were trying to be neutral, we were not accepting Jews from Germany at the same time as well. Folks from Vietnam, after we destroyed that country during the Vietnam War, we were not accepting the amount of refugees that we could have been accepting too. And so when you say that the influx, as if it's just sort of a mass descending on the U.S., there's also other aspects to it and other things we can do without just hurting people trying to enter the country.
No, I hear you on that. Absolutely. It's, being someone who worked in Afghanistan and actually worked alongside some of the Afghani nationals who supported America, and then to see us pull out of that country and then kind of leave them high and dry. I have
5 clients right now that are still waiting for humanitarian parole to be able to enter the U.S. All of them.
And where are they at currently?
2 of them have been kidnapped in Libya, and I haven't heard from them in a while.
Contact me offline. I have several friends who work with organizations that help, rescue our allies. The men who served with us alongside in Afghanistan, and something that is near and dear to my heart. That you can't go and serve with us, go to war with us, and then allow us to leave you high and dry. I don't agree with that. And so there is several organizations of special operations, brothers of mine, who do what they have to do to try and help this situation. So we'll talk offline on that and try and connect you with that as well.
Okay. That's great.
This isn't there's no black and white answer to this. You're right. There is people who see it and say, well, why are they even trying? Well, I don't like that answer. I think that's ignorant. I think that's short-sighted. I don't know what the answer is myself, but I do agree on things like investing into other countries and helping them establish, a country that is livable, that is enjoyable, that has, that is fruitful for their people. I do agree. We have to also protect our nation, and it's hard to decipher what that looks like without becoming North Korea as well, and without being so fortified that there is no freedoms, right? And so the balance in that is tough. If you do get a chance to read my book, I'd love to have another conversation later and seeing how you feel about hearing a book. I mean, the conversation would be no different than what you see here. I'm not this aggressive posture towards any of this, because I think there's so much here to unpack that not everyone's willing to dig into it. And I'm willing to go to the distance and learn as much as I can about this subject.
But I'm interested in your opinion, because this is the first time, because I don't speak the language. This is the first time we've had Afghan clients, and I'm interested what you think should be the policy for accepting folks from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and what's the limit, or how do we do it? Because it seems to me what you're talking about along the border is similar to what's happening with those individuals as well. There's just no coherence. There's no humanity as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a tough one. We have systems that are in place that we can identify if there's connection to terrorist organizations, right? That would be something I do personally. I'd be able to check background checks, do everything to make sure that they are not associated. At the same time, if we have proof that they've worked with us alongside of us, I think it's a no-brainer. We have to do our best to bring them into this country, give them a visa so they can work towards becoming a permanent resident, and then eventually gaining citizenship.
What about family members? How far do you go with their family?
Absolutely. But I think, if you start that game, it begins really crazy, right? That's the hard part of all of this. You allow one person into this country, all of a sudden, like, yeah, but my family, oh yeah. And then it becomes, this exponential
are the family
growth.
members in danger? So that one individual that worked with you in Afghanistan, are their siblings, kids, wives in danger because they worked with you?
I think you always allow their wives and their direct family. I think that's always an important thing, because why do we do what we do without our family, right? You can't tell me that you're going to rescue me and my wife and my kids. I wouldn't agree with it. I just stay in the trouble, So I believe all their families should be allowed in this country and given the opportunities of this great nation, and so that's what I believe. But, I still believe we have a country worth fighting for. I still believe we have a country why everyone's still running here. You know what I mean? You go down the border, no one's leaving this country, running away as much as you are here. This is still the land of opportunity, and those who I believe who have fought for this country deserve to have the opportunities of staying in this country, or at least coming to this country. It's no different than I just talked to a gentleman who was a deported veteran. He served in our country. He was a permanent resident, and then he got out and he struggled with post-traumatic stress. He finds himself making bad decisions because, he's drinking. He's addicted to pain meds now because the military gives us pain meds that are addictive. And then he found himself getting exiled for 10 years. There's over 600 deported veterans currently that I'm trying to help in that fight as well, because I find it unfair. I think if you served our country, you should have been given citizenship. So then when you do get arrested, if you do find yourself and you're still here in your country, you're still here in the country that you sacrifice for. There's a very small percentage who even serve this nation. And so those should be afforded that opportunity as well. So like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. There's many different branches of this tree that we can go down,
Sure.
But
I didn't know that there's 600 deported veterans, you said, huh?
It's close. The number, they say it's hard to identify the exact number, but from 300 to 5,000. I last heard from one of the gentlemen who's a huge advocate. He gave me a number of solid 650 something. And so yeah, there's veterans who've been deployed because of different reasons, and they've been deported for different reasons, and they can't seem to find their way back. They don't have advocates. So there's a bill currently right now that they're trying to pass that if you pass basic training, boom, you're given U.S. citizenship. And then at that point, well, now you're protected. And that's fair. To me, that's fair. If you get through your contract, you should be given that. But again, going down another branch of this argument, there's just so many areas that we can address. I do appreciate your time. I think we can do another hour of this down the road. Because
we had an hour already? Oh, shit.
Yeah, we're coming up to an hour, if not plus right now. But wow. JJ, is there anything else, any part of this topic that you felt I didn't give you the opportunity to explain or express? Please, you're more than welcome to raise a question at all.
No, I was really interested to hear what you're talking about, especially I think the mental health aspect of this whole thing, especially you're talking about psychology. That's a big interest in my house as well, because of my wife being a psychologist. A lot of this, whether you're talking about veterans with post-traumatic stress, you're talking about refugees fleeing their war-torn nations, you're talking about border patrol agents working along the border, a lot of them veterans, a lot of them Latino, the dead bodies they come upon, all this stuff is very, very traumatic. And a lot of the actions and reactions we have from that, you're talking about breaking laws. Sometimes, the laws that folks break is directly related to what's going on in their head and what's going on in their body. And I think that's a big aspect of this. All we're talking about is law and order, but the actual human ability to live through some of these things is really difficult at times too. And that affects a lot of this issue as well.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think that's why I'm drawn to this issue and trying to find answers for it, because I understand it on many different, I guess, spectrums, and this is a very human argument. This is a very human thing. And for people to want to come to this country, sometimes us in our own country don't even have the same gratitude towards it, right? People aren't willing to. I
always say all of my clients are the most patriotic people I've ever spoken to. Honestly, their belief in the United States is far surpassed any of the U.S. citizens I have as friends.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, an Ironclad original. Going into this conversation with JJ, I didn't know what to expect. I was actually apprehensive and nervous that it might turn into an argument. After what you guys have witnessed, I think most of you probably did not think about the perspective of someone in his shoes and what he sees daily. And I'm forever grateful for having that opportunity, and I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be back next week with another interview from a different perspective.